The Academy of Esports podcast is powered by LeagueSpot. LeagueSpot, your brand, your league, your way.
Well, we have a special thing that, because I know you have passions and there's things that you love, and I want to take a moment to bring on a special guest. I have never done this before on this podcast. We're bringing on a third guest right now. I get to bring on Josh Shaw here. Now, Josh, I get to do a little introduction. I know you're a stage performer, and I know you have stage performers have tendencies to want to come in and be dramatic and big. But I have to do my introduction, please. So, sorry. No, actually we're recording, so this works out really well. So we can clean up this part.
Sorry about that, gentlemen.
Oh, are you kidding me? That was awesome. Yeah. All right. So right now the esports industry is, as Amir was just alluding to in a very emotional way, that there are talented employees who are getting pulled in different directions as they grasp for sustainability. They're grasping for relevancy. But then comes along someone from outside that bubble, Josh Shaw, who, since he doesn't know that model, goes a different way into the mainstream community and meets great success. Josh Shaw is the founding artistic director and CEO of Pacific Opera Project. It is described as LA's most exciting new opera company. The Star Trek-inspired Abduction from the Seraglio. Did I say that right? Seraglio?
Seraglio, yeah.
Seraglio. Sorry, my Italian is bad. I apologize. Let me try that again. Star Trek-inspired Abduction from the Seraglio and Nintendo-inspired Magic Flute have gained national attention and shattered attendance records. Of particular interest, as the VP of Education and Innovation, is the amazing free curriculum that comes back to that in a moment, and we'll come back to that in a moment. And Amir is already a super fan, so I'm going to pass the reins off to Amir here and let him take hold. But first, Josh, I'd like to thank you for taking time to step out of your production and come be a guest on the Academy of Esports podcast today.
Yeah, thrilled to be here. Great to learn about all of this.
Thank you, Josh. Yeah, no, James, I appreciate it. Josh, I am so excited. I mean, to tell you a little bit about how this all came together. So Fiona and James have known my passion for opera for a long time. So I've been nuts about classical music since I was a little child, have been nuts about opera since I was about 10, and was going to the Met with my family starting in 97, and have probably been to 400, 500 operas in my life. I have my collection of scores downstairs, and I play piano and French horn and stuff like that. And so nothing on the level of people as part of your troupe, but I want you to know, as an enthusiast who appreciates it, I really care about what you're doing. And the reason I particularly value Pacific Opera is that, and I'm sure you already know all of this, is, I remember when I was younger, and I still have them, the Met Opera Guild used to have these almost like those little golden books that they have for kids of the operas. And I have a full set of them for like the Ring Cycle and Carmen. Cool. And they had little passages that like a parent could play with their child. And of course they had, traveling companies for the Met, which they stopped. And they used to go to Japan, and the Guild used to have much deeper programs that they did in the New York public schools. And so as someone who really cares about the art form and who really loves your productions, first, I just wanted to say I really appreciate you, because the level and quality of which you're doing it across every level is amazing. I had actually not seen the Magic Flute one, but had seen the Abduction from the Seraglio, and pointing everyone I can to you. So let me stop talking and just say, this is really exciting. But I would love to ask you, I have a whole bunch of questions, but my first one is, and I'm sure it wasn't a single moment, but how did it all come together for your passions and the passions of your team? What was the genesis of you deciding to do this in the first place?
Of doing everything I do, or of doing the super?
Just starting Pacific Opera. What was the genesis of trying to do that? And I don't know when along that journey you drove such a major educational element and wanting to have kind of accessible productions, if that was the idea from the very beginning, but please.
Yeah, no, I can, well, first of all, great. Thanks. So great to hear all of this and so glad I'm here. You know, it started in 2011 with a couple people that I was singing with or working with in LA quite a bit. And, you know, really the genesis was just, we thought we found ourselves doing so many things when I was a singer at the time, when we were in productions, you know, whether that was helping with a set or helping with the marketing or painting the set or bringing our own costumes. At some point, it just got to this thing where we were like, it might be easier just to do this from scratch. Not true, but maybe better, definitely better. So we started with just $5,000 and did a little Trouble in Tahiti, which is now one of my favorite operas of all time. It was successful, and so then we went on. And the genesis was really just, let's do something that we can be proud of, and that people who are, you know, much more talented than I was at singing could be a part of, and feel their time was valued and they had a great experience on stage, even if they were getting paid nothing or peanuts. So that started in 2011, and then we did another one, and suddenly you're a real thing. And here we are 50 something productions later, and, you know, approaching $1 million budget, and just things this was never a plan. It happened. But the way we got to what everyone always asks is, how did you become this company that does these accessible and things? And it's simple. It's just like, that's what the people wanted. So just give them more of that. And I think that really started all the way back with our second production, which was Don Giovanni, which I happen to be in Florida directing a Don Giovanni right now, with a lot more money and resources than that one was. But that was, you know, all budget based. The concept came about of this kind of like, when I saw the characters in these bright colors, and at the time, now everything's different, but at the time you could only buy like a solid red suit kind of in one style. And that was kind of like the zoot suit style. And so suddenly I found myself with like Don Giovanni in this red zoot suit and Leporello in this orange. And suddenly I was like, yeah, this kind of just looks like the mob. And then that Don Giovanni works great in a mob setting because you have these hierarchies of people. And so that led to like this Dick Tracy looking concept. And and people just really thought that was so clever and so cool. And the reality was it was purely budget driven. But that kind of got.
I love that.
That's really cool.
Yeah, well, and there's those stories continue throughout pop's history, but it was like, oh, you know, I noticed like people could connect a little bit more with this production. A few people anyway were like, oh yeah, it reminds me of Dick Tracy, or something like that. And then that sparked this what my whole philosophy is for directing opera now, whether it's there or other places, is like, what's the shortest route from the average person on the street to getting them into the door for this opera? And often that is something they already know. So whether that's Star Trek, or whether that's retro Nintendo games, whether that's I did a Gone with the Wind spoof once. And it's not like everything I do is some Hollywood spoof or game spoof, but often those are the things that have been in our culture for 50, you know, Star Trek, 50 years, you know. So you trick them in once with a gimmick, and I love gimmicks. And then, you know, they say, wow, this was pretty cool. I'd give this another try for Boheme next month. And then they say, well, this isn't bad at all. I guess I'll be coming back. And, you know, those people stick with us for years and years. And here we are.
Well, it's definitely not a gimmick. It's really special. If you doubt that I'm super opera fan gushing, I keep 2 batons at my desk at all times, and I have one rotating score at all times. I have Le Clemenza de Tito over here, but it's slightly out of my reach. But yeah, but no, that's so. So the other thing that I was going to ask you is, you know, I'm so curious how much you interact with general directors and artistic directors at other opera companies, and kind of when you talk to them about some of the key elements, right? You know, at a more general 30,000 foot level, like the educational stuff, making it more accessible. What do they say? Are they like, oh, you Pacific Opera people, like, with your accessibility stuff? Are they like, we want to, but just we don't have the money, we don't have the means? Like, what do they say when you kind of tell them what you're doing?
Yeah, in general, people really love what we're doing, but we do run into a lot of walls where there's just so much, oh, we couldn't do that because, big companies don't do that. They don't do these wild things. And I really hope we're breaking down those walls, because I'm like, do you want to sell tickets and reach people or not? But I get it. It would be very weird for me to come here in Southern Florida, where the population's all, 60 plus, and suddenly we're doing, the super flute. Now, they may end up loving it if they see it, but are they going to come see it in the first place? So it's not as simple as I wish it was, but everyone has always been looking for the past however many decades for ways to get new and younger audiences into the opera. You got to meet them where they're at. That's the bottom line, is give them something they're interested in.
I know we only have a couple of minutes left, but I just have to ask, when can we see the Disco Elysium Choose Your Own Adventure opera, where the audience gets to decide what track the main character takes?
Yeah, I would be shocked if something like that doesn't already exist somewhere. I bet it does. But opera is the most complicated art form. So if you're going to have multiple places you can go, that's a lot of music learned, a lot of orchestra rehearsals, a lot of things. Opera does not lend itself to improvisation, but I think that's why people.
Just picturing improv, like I'm doing a soft shoe on stage because something fell down. That kind of improvisation.
James, go ahead, Josh, please. I'm sorry.
But when you can squeeze in some improv, like in the Abduction show, for instance, there's a lot, because there's dialogue. There's dialogue, and when there's dialogue, you get a lot more flexibility. And people just love, we all love, like,
people forget that the point of these is to have fun. It's like, it reminds me of how in the old days, it's like during Barber of Seville, when I was a kid, whenever Rosina has her music lesson scene, every soprano would improvise. They would sing anything. Yeah. They would sing like My Old Country Home and like stuff like that. And people are like, oh no, we need to be more serious. But James, I was going to ask, do we have time for one more question for Josh?
Yeah, sure. Go.
So Josh, if you either more straight lace or over the top, anything, if I come to you now and I was like, here, Josh, you have unlimited amount of money. You now can do any production of any opera that you want anyway. What would you do?
Well, see, I should always have a answer for that, but I really don't. Like that's the curse and the blessing of so many of these productions that I've come up with, is like, I'm in this box of like, here's your budget, or here's the venue, this weird venue you have, or you name it. And that's what really sparks creativity. I get worried when someone says, here's $5 million. I mean, please, God, let that happen. But I will spend it. But then the world is open to, you could do anything. So if I have to answer it, I just got hired for Turandot last night, and I have no idea what I'm going to do. So that's the one to spend some money on.
That's cool. That's cool.
Well, Josh, thank you for taking time to. I know that those of you who are watching on the show on YouTube get to see that the backstage life. You don't have a lot of big spaces, and a lot of things are happening behind Josh as costumes are getting steamed.
It's crazy day here. One day load in at 8 a.m. and then dress rehearsal at 7 o'clock tonight. So,
but again, entertaining opera is accessible opera. That is the big message. Josh, your curriculum, I think it's important. I know we only have a couple of minutes, but I want to touch on that. I will make this available. I'll link it in the show notes, because again, looking at something like the Magic Flute, a Nintendo-inspired version, is going to open opera to a lot of people. Earlier, we were talking about the common mythologies of video games amongst people. Yeah. And then obviously PacificOperaProject.com is where they can get more information.
Yeah.
Josh, anything else to promote before we let you get on back to?
Next up for us at Pop is a real fun production of Pirates of Penzance. A few little spins, but the big spin is it's outdoors, like at the top of Glendale, California, and it's going to be super cool. And that's in May. And then we'll be announcing our full season on Thursday of next week. So,
well, if ever you're going to do an opera version of the Rocky Horror Show, I am in to try out at least.
All right. Noted.
Josh, thank you so much for everything you do. Really appreciate your company. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. All right, guys. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Josh.
All right.
That was wonderful.
That was cool. They really are really special. And something, James, I didn't mention when he was here because I wanted us to maximize every minute of his time is, for our listeners, this is against a backdrop when the Met, which is many people may not know this. It's actually the biggest performing arts institution in the United States with a budget of, nearly $350 million. The Met, despite their best efforts, of course, all performing arts institutions are hurting because of COVID. But the Met, when I first started going with my family in 1997 was the first time I went, 96, 97. The Met was 100% subscribed. They never had trouble selling tickets. They were sold out. Like anything they wanted to do, the world was their oyster. The last few seasons, sales had been, if I remember correctly, like in the mid 60s, like 65%, 70% of the house sold, to the point where they've announced that next season, they're shortening the season by several operas, and they're actually trying really different things, like trying a lot more contemporary operas, because those are the ones that have sold the best. So if we could imagine any better proof point for what Josh and his team are doing, it's that accessibility, new operas, things that shake up the formula. As he said it better than I could, it's like, do you want to be in business? I'm paraphrasing him a little bit. Do you want to be in business and sell tickets and have something that people want to see? Or do you have some like standard you want to aspire to? I mean, there's something in between, but it's more urgent than ever. And he deserves a lot of praise for what he and his team are doing. It's very different.
Well, and to think that it's so far off that opera, because opera has this stigma, right? It is the fat lady singing. It is the, Viking horns, or it's what you saw with Bugs Bunny with what they call it, the barber shop of Seville, I think is what they called it. Those are that's the stigma. But, it's amazing to see how things like The Producers or Spam-A-Lot, which was the take of Monty Python's Holy Grail, or Hairspray being turned into musicals. It's not that far off that Spam-A-Lot couldn't have just been a very funny opera. Even seeing, I saw A Midsummer Night's Dream as an opera. It was amazing. And I knew the story, but it was never intended originally as an opera. It was intended as a play by Shakespeare. So it's not that far off to think that, again, entertaining opera is accessible. I would absolutely go see a Rocky Horror Show opera. Absolutely. I would buy even if the reviews were terrible, I'm buying tickets to get that experience.
No, it's absolutely true. And like people forget, like still today, so there's a site out there called Opera Base. And what Opera Base does is it's an incredibly searchable database of like what's performed by year. And one of the things they're most famous for, which is fun, is you can see what was the most popular opera, last year, over the last decade. And over the last decade, and I believe last year, and this has been true for probably the last 40 years, the most performed opera in the world is Mozart's The Magic Flute. And Mozart's The Magic Flute was not written for a count or a duke or an emperor. It was written for a popular theater with the libretto written by Mozart's friend, who was like his fellow Freemason. And it was popular entertainment for everybody. And so I think that the danger, as you say so nicely, James, is that we can't put opera under this glass bowl that it's like this pristine thing. That's not what it was supposed to be. Maybe it was for a short period of time for some of the operas that were written for the aristocracy, but that's certainly not what it was by the end of the 18th century. And certainly by the 19th century, in the golden age of opera, it was really meant to be a popular art form, and we can't forget that.
I enjoy there's a scene. It's not necessarily that it was opera, but it was a scene in the movie Tombstone, right? Movie Tombstone takes place in Tombstone, Arizona in the late 1800s, where you have Wyatt Earp and the fantastic Val Kilmer as Doc Holliday. I'm convinced that if I got a time traveling machine, I would get to go back and see Doc Holliday. And if it was not Val Kilmer, I would be upset that it was not Val Kilmer. But there's a scene where they are doing a play production of, I think it was Faust, right? And like they're trying to, and I remember one of the characters is trying to explain what's happening. We think that these things, as you said, the heyday of opera is in the 19th century. That's the 1800s. I mean, we're talking the Civil War. We're talking expansion west. Those of you who like watching Yellowstone, your whatever season it was, 1844 or whatever it was, I forget what the years were anymore. 1884. That's not that long ago. I mean, heck, we had John Tyler's grandson still alive up until recently. So, and that was the 16th president of the United States. Go look that up if you do not believe me. John Tyler's grandsons. Go look it up. But that brings us into, and you talked about how Mozart didn't put himself in a glass box. As you said, he wrote for everybody. When it comes to creation of music, he could do German, he could do Italian, he could do French, he could do all these different. I mean, if there was a savant, a musical, like the ultimate musical savant. A lot of people like to point to Beethoven, and I'm more of a George Frederick Handel fan myself. Sorry for my hesitation there, but Mozart. I mean, if you have not watched Amadeus, go watch that. It's of course it's stereo, it's movie, Hollywoodish, but it's still my favorite scene is when he walks into the Austrian king's court, and they've produced a song for him, and he sits down and he's heard it once and he's already able to play it, and he's able to riff on it and make it better. I mean, this guy, as you said, we need to not put let's bring it back to video games. We can't just put video games in as this thing for kids. This is going to be, I'm 47 years old. The older I get, the more video games I'm going to play, especially when I'm retired. When I have nothing else to do, guess what I'm doing? I'm going to be playing video games. We can't put that under a glass bowl and say, this is for kids or this is for that. We can't do that. Just like I said, that's where I guess we're bringing this all back together. Right?
Yeah, no, these things are eternal. And it's like, Mozart was a noted great improviser and gave many concerts. And he was probably as popular in his day as most rock stars are today. It's like you have to think of these things in the scope of what the equivalent is today. And it's like a lot of these stories, to your point, James, that exist in the operas are really eternal. Like people are like, oh, what's La Boheme? And I'm like, well, you know what La Boheme is? La Boheme is Rent. They basically took the story from La Boheme and they made it more modern. That's what it is. And like, there's so many examples like this. Like the story of Don Giovanni is like one of the most timeless stories that exists. And there are like so many movies and things like that are based upon its plot. So you hit the nail on the head. Like, look, any art form, any old art form needs to find a way to make itself relevant and accessible. And it's like, it's not so foreign that something like what Josh is doing should be done. I mean, heck, look at how many like modern adaptations there are of Shakespeare. And I'm sure they came to the same conclusion, which is like, how do you take something that's, 400 to 500 years old and make it without any music and anything? It's just a play. How do you make it interesting? Well, like spice it up, put it in a context that makes it relevant to today. And that's what everyone needs to do. Well,
as you are somebody who leverages a creative mindset to help thousands of people overcome job uncertainty, as we're transitioning back out of this this very different conversation than I've ever had on this podcast.
That was really fun, by the way. What a treat. I really, I never say anything I don't mean, but that was really cool. Like, I've met a lot of general and artistic directors. That was really cool. Anyway, keep going. Sorry.
Well, it's been said that a career is a painting and not a ladder. Or I guess we could say a career is an opera and not a rock song in some ways. It has very many twists and turns, and that you should never say no to a job you haven't been offered. Given your approach and patience in building up so many skills while trying for years to move into your dream role of gaming, do either of those resonate? And can you speak from what job seekers can be doing to be creative in the hunt?
Definitely. I think that it's oftentimes really hard to see how your job path is going to take you where you want to go. And I think, and I know this is for many job seekers who are listening to this, maybe hard to hear or hard to accept. I think that you need to always know when you've given it your best and it's time to move on into something else. And one, to allow yourself to do that, but two, have that bigger plan of how all the pieces are going to fit together. So I'll give you a really specific example. When 2 or 3 jobs ago, before I was at Amazon, I had a team of people whom I had worked with at several previous companies at, EMC and VMware. And they were at a company called Veeam. And at Veeam, they asked me to come over there to that team, originally in strategy and operations to help them. But when I was there, they were like, Amir, we have this 10-person data science team that we'd like you to run. And I had not worked in data science. I mean, I had been in grad school for 5 years. So, I had a reasonable grad level of comfort with stats, but it was certainly a little bit of outside of my comfort zone. Certainly wasn't in games per our conversation today, but I jumped at it and I was like, absolutely. Why? Because one, I always go with the people first. The people whom I was working with were people that I liked and I trusted, and I knew that they would put me in situations where I would learn and I would have professional success and growth. I think a lot of times people forget that, yes, developing skills is critically important, but also having career growth can often trump a lot of other things. If you're in an organization and people see that in a short amount of time, you went from senior manager to director to senior director, it matters. But if that's happening at a good, solid company, that really matters. It's going to increase your income expectations when you take on your next role. It's going to take on how many people trust that people think you can manage other people. Ethan Evans, who's a friend of mine who used to be a VP at Amazon, wrote an amazing post today where he tried to confront this issue that so many people on the LinkedIn channel ask me, which is, basically, Amir, I appreciate all your advice. I've tried everything that you said, but I just can't break through. And I'm really not doing justice to Ethan's amazing post. But the basic point of what he said is everything is about a balancing act. Your job is to convince the person who's going to give you your next job that they can feel comfortable hiring you. Now, if you haven't worked in games and you haven't done that specific thing in that specific function, you obviously need to dial up the volume on something else that you're doing. That could be more skills. It could be your seniority. It could be demonstrated competency. It could be referrals from people who are respected in another industry who worked with you. So that role, the data science one, is my example, James. But the reason is all of those factors that I mentioned got a nice boost, even though it wasn't in the same function or in the same industry as where I ultimately wanted to go.
That is fantastic advice. I love that advice. That's going to be a clip, by the way. I'm going to take that one out and make that one a special, this is the advice that I think I could have used probably 3 or 4 years ago. Because as an educator coming out, you look around and you go, well, what the heck can I do? I've been teaching what you've been doing is managing 30 people and then you have 60 bosses that you have to answer to on top of those 30 people. So you're not just, you're an ultimate middleman in a lot of ways. You're also doing politics. You're also the internal politics of your building and sometimes the politics of your community. You've got, once you start to put all those things out there, and if you're an award-winning teacher and if you're meeting goals and meeting expectations, that says a whole lot as well too. So I love how you put that in again, I've tried it's better than saying I've tried nothing and I'm all out of ideas. I love that you brought it back that way. Well, Amir, this has been a very dense conversation. We've been talking for well close to an hour. We've talked about, oh my gosh, we've talked about, okay, we've got the job seekers workbook, right? We've talked about how stories and how powerful they are in transmitting message, not just, in games and gameplay, but just in general. We've talked about opera. I never thought in a million years that I would talk about the Academy of Esports and opera, but guess what? The crossover of the Magic Flute, the Nintendo-inspired production of the Magic Flute, it makes all the sense now when you start to think about it, and the curriculum that is involved with that. Because I'll tell you, one of the hardest questions I get asked, everybody is so STEM focused on everything when it comes to games because there's a computer, but they very rarely ever get to the art and the music. And again, I think you as a person have lived that example, that music especially has such a special place here. I want to thank you for being so giving of your time and coming here. What can people expect from you next? What is next for you, my friend?
Gosh, well, the next big thing that they can expect is we're going to have a third baby. And I think I'm trying to allocate as much mental space and patience as I can to supporting my partner and Jess. But that's family always comes first. And so I'm very focused on and very excited about that. I can say that beyond that, though, in our LinkedIn community, you can expect a lot in a good way, not more of the same, but more variety of fun things at hopefully the level of sincerity and love and fun and games that you've seen so far. And I just hope the community continues to grow, not because, as you know, James, and everyone on the community knows, I never monetize anything, and that's not what I care about at all. And it's not for my own personal aggrandizement or counting skins. It's because, the more people who are in the community, the more people who know that they belong in a place where they're valued, and the more people we can help. And I think that, professionally, I've really enjoyed the challenge that's going on at work at AWS and, continuing to grow those skills, like we just talked about Veeam and data science. I think you always have to have a very pliable, mind in terms of growing your skills with good people you want to be around. And so I hope that I can continue to do those three things and continue to balance them and have a good time. And I hope maybe one day down the road, we can be back and we can have another incredibly far-ranging discussion. Maybe we'll talk about ballet next time.
Well, something I've experienced ballet, but not done ballet. Well, with all of that said, my friend, Amir Satvat, I want to thank you for giving your time. Please make sure, folks, that if you have not already checked out, looked him up on LinkedIn, the link will be in the show notes. If you need to get access to the Job Seekers Workbook, that will also be in the show notes. And if anybody needs to get 30 minutes of free time, I recommend highly. There is a database of over 230 people, myself included, that you can reach out to who have said, yes, we will give 30 minutes of our time to you to answer any questions that you may have. Amir, thank you so much for being a guest on the Academy of Esports podcast today.
Thank you so much. It was a wonderful opportunity, James. And again, I do sincerely hope we can be back one day to continue the conversation. Thank you.
That will do it for this week on the Academy of Esports. I've been your host, James O'Hagan. Esports are organized competitive video games allowing schools to redefine their athletic culture, diversify opportunities for student participation, promote good physical and mental health, increase collegiate scholarship pathways, and play games. We can never forget the importance of play. The mission of the Academy of Esports is to support these ideals. The vision of the Academy of Esports is for all students to experience the fun and joy of playing competitive video games. You may follow me on Twitter at Jim O'Hagan. That's at JIMOHAGAN, and through the Academy of Esports account at TAO Esports. It's a great way to get the latest blog posts, podcast episodes, and news coming out of esports and education. And remember, you can continue your engagement by going to www.taoesports.com. You can also connect through Facebook at www.facebook.com/TAOesports. Thanks again for listening, and I look forward to our time again next week.